Hey, Cooper here with a video on how I made these DIY video lights. I found a bunch of LED strips in a dumpster behind Target last summer, and now I found an awesome use for them. I was able to get all the materials for these lights for under $10, which is pretty sweet. Check out my blog post if you'd like to know more about these materials and how you might be able to get some for yourself. Anyway, let's get to the fun part. I started off with my LED strips and cut them in half to be a better size. Each strip draws about 150 milliamps, and my power supplies output 1 amp max, so I could have 5 full strips per power supply. That means when I cut them in half, I could have 10 rows of lights. Next, I found a piece of plywood and cut it down to size, leaving a border of about 1/2 inch on each side for extra stuff like wires and hardware. I knew I wanted to be able to mount these things on my camera, so I used some L brackets that I had lying around. Unfortunately, the holes weren't large enough for a 1/4-20 bolt to fit through, so I had to drill them out. I then mounted the L brackets on the back sides of the plywood and spray painted them black. The LED strips I had were designed to be chained together and had connectors on the ends. I wanted to solder directly to the boards, so I cut them off and trimmed the circuit boards down a bit. Then I laid out the LEDs on the plywood and drew a line to have an easy reference once I applied the hot glue. Then I glued them all down, making sure that they were lined up with the contacts all facing one direction. Next, I drilled out 2 small holes in the top corner for my main voltage rails to run through. I ended up using 16 gauge copper wire for my rails, which has a diameter of 0.05 inches, so I used a 1/16 inch drill bit, which is 0.0625 inches. Then I hot glued the rails in place and bent them down flat against the back. The next step was to tin the small sections of wire I'd prepared. I cut down a piece of Cat 5 and pulled out the inner wires, which seemed to work really well. Trying to strip the jackets off, however, was a complete pain, so I ended up just melting it with the soldering iron as I was tinning the wire. Next, I tinned the pads on the LED strips, and then soldered on my positive leads. Since each one of my strips was only half of the original strip, some of the strips had the positive contacts on the left and some had them on the right. When I was laying them out, I forgot to organize them in any sort of manageable fashion, so I ended up with a random pattern of pluses and minuses. Oh well, it'll look more DIY, right? Then I cut my positive leads to the proper length and soldered them onto the positive rail. I repeated the process with my negative leads. Next, I prepared my power supply. I cut off the existing tip and stripped and tinned the ends. Make sure to note which lead is positive and which is negative. On low voltage DC circuits, the positive lead is always marked in some manner, in this case with a striped white line. Then I touched the leads to my rails and kaboom, it works. The next step was to add a lead to the back of the light panel. I soldered some thin stranded wire onto the male side of a pair of Dean's connectors I had, and soldered the power supply leads onto the female side. Then I soldered the stranded wires onto my voltage rails, making sure to connect the red wire to the positive rail. At this point, I really should have put some heat shrink on, but I didn't have any of the right size, so I'll just have to be careful not to let the bare leads touch anything conductive and short out. Or maybe I'll end up putting some Sugru on the connectors. Well, here we go, all finished up and working beautifully. Now I just need to order some batteries so that I'm not always stuck to a plug. Well, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. A big shout out to the BTU lab at CU for all the awesome space and tools. And thanks to Target for all the awesome LEDs. Stay tuned to my channel for some more good stuff. See ya.